This is Bonjour Chai, the culturally anti-Semitic edition. I'm Avi Feingold, and we're here with Phoebe Maltz-Vovey and special guest host Ellin Bessner. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we talk about the Globe editorial about the rising anti-Semitism in Canada. We talk about the history and the cultural significance of anti-Semitism in Canada. We talk about how the world perceives Canada on the world stage now. All that and more coming right up. I feel like the streams have crossed today. We have an amazing guest host who is long overdue. We should have had you on a long time ago. Ellin Bessner, host of the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia. Welcome to Bonjour Chai.
Everybody knows that. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we were going to talk about this huge sprawling topic that involved so much history, so much deep knowledge of Canadian politics and Jewish journalism. And we're like, well, we can't not do this without you, Ellin. So welcome. We're glad. I anticipate an amazing conversation. But first, within a short span of about 2 days, there was Senator Joe Lieberman passed away, Daniel Kahneman, who was a Nobel-winning economist, Martin Greenfield, who was a tailor who learned his craft at Auschwitz as a young teen, became a very famous tailor in Brooklyn. I have a couple of Martin Greenfield suits. Ellin, you are somebody that does honorable mention all the time. How do you deal with this onslaught? Like when these, all these famous notable individuals who are, not young, but they pass away, and it's a lot to take in, at once, no?
Well, that's because we are all coming to a certain age. They're all coming to a certain age in the 80s and 90s where people who built the community, people who built the nation, Jewish leaders of that generation, post-Second World War generation, are all, and we could say the same for Holocaust survivors, although we're kind of post that already, Second World War veterans too. You see a lot of them all at once. And so what you do, if we had the staff and we had we had an obit department, you would do this in advance. You would do pre-obit obits and you put them in the can. And that's what most large news organizations did. I mean, I remember when the Pope died, Pope John Paul II, I'd been working on the death of the Pope for 5 years. We had binders, we had people lined up, we had all the tape already cut. This is when I was at CTV News. And so let's say when we had Irving Abella, Max Eisen, two big luminaries of Canadian, one academia and Jewish leadership, and one Holocaust survivor, speaker and educator, died within the same few months. You scramble, yeah. And you look a lot at old stuff that you wrote. You take a lot of old tape that you have, but yeah, it's an all-nighter that you have to put together. And it's also a loss too. One more thing, because you knew these people. It's not like I never met Joe Lieberman. It wasn't a thing for me. That's an American. I mean, we knew who he was, of course, but friend of Israel, Orthodox leader. But when you actually have covered Irving Abella and worked with them, or Max Eisen in Toronto, the Holocaust speaker, it hits you really hard too. You're mourning and writing
Absolutely.
at the same time.
Let's move on to our main topic, which was spurred by this Globe editorial, which Phoebe, you wrote about, Canada's dangerous slide into anti-Semitism. Phoebe, why don't you tell us a bit about the background, and then let's shift to Ellin about what's actually happening.
Sure. So, I mean, this was the Globe's from the editorial board, published March 22nd. And I should say I'm a freelance columnist for them. I had nothing to do with this particular editor. I don't do that. That has nothing to do with my role. So I read it like any other reader. And basically, it's this wake-up call about just sort of that summarizes a lot of stories that will be familiar to anybody who follows the Canadian Jewish news. And then it ends by saying, we've taken the liberty of writing the motion that the House ought to bring forth and adopt unanimously. This House unequivocally condemns anti-Semitism in all its forms, and in particular rejects the idea that Jewish Canadians are in any way responsible for the actions of the State of Israel, end quote. So basically, the thing that jumped out at me the most about this was this line specifically. On Monday, an NDP member of Parliament, Brian Massey, acknowledged the rise in anti-Semitism in Canada, but said, we're not going to be able to fix anything right now until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. And then it notes that he has since apologized. And that line specifically, though, struck me because that type of argument, I think, is very, very prevalent in Canada, especially at this moment. This idea that anti-Semitism may be rising, but feeling a bit insulted in Canada is nothing compared to being bombed in Gaza. So really, we shouldn't care. And I guess I can't tell. I don't know whether to say it's heartening that the newspaper is taking this on. I don't know whether to say that it is depressing that it has to. But it struck me as noteworthy that this is considered like a big issue in Canada at this time, worthy of speaking out about.
So, Ellin, I think we can separate this whole, all of these incidents, all of the discussions going on into two separate really buckets. One is, what's happening at the high levels of government, right? What's happening federally, what's happening governmentally, and what's happening culturally, like day to day amongst the people.
Well, if you just have to look at statistics across the country that are reported incidents, police in Toronto every month release their updates of hate crimes, and it's skyrocketing against Jews. And then if you look at the school board statistics, for example, Toronto District School Board, they have partial statistics. Mostly it's against Black, LGBTQ, and other ethnic groups. But in terms of hate by religion, Jews, who make up a very small portion of the TDSB, Toronto District School Board, for example, are really, really small. But they're number one when it comes to hate against racial groups. And what I see is that it is pervasive in a way that I have not seen in my lifetime. Sure, there was stuff going when we went to college and when I was growing up. I went to a Jewish school in Montreal, and our Bagel Boys basketball team used to get beat up by the P9 kids when they came, the French Catholic schools, to play basketball. Or our school actually got firebombed, and the Herzliya Saint Laurent got firebombed in Montreal. The library was burnt down, and the fellow who did it was convicted. And yeah, he just said he did it because of Israel-Palestine. But this was a long time ago. It was one-offs. Thank God there hasn't been that. There's small incidents. No one's been hurt in the Jewish community, but it's literally every day. It's not once in a while. Mm-hmm. It's every single day, whether it's the political people making comments, newspapers putting anti-Jewish caricature, editorial cartoons. Mm-hmm. And that's the difference between what happened then and what happened now. On the other hand, and it has to be said, the Muslim community in Canada has literally been murdered for Islamophobia. Mm-hmm. So when people say, oh, yes, but you Jews, you complain too much. Look, we're actually getting murdered. But it's by white supremacists, not by Jewish people. Nobody seems to remember that. Yes, it's absolutely horrific that mosques have been, shot at, and our worshipers have been murdered. And in London, a family was run over. But this has nothing to do with Israel-Palestine or Judaism. It has to do with replacement theory, right?
Sure, but it's come up multiple times. The idea that Jews sometimes feel like we have to win the Victim Olympics, and that's not healthy for us. And this happened before October 7th. So I think that what we're seeing is, the apotheosis of such thinking.
Well, I was going to just say, because Ellin, I had the joy of editing your forthcoming CJN magazine article. Reading it made me think about just sort of, because you have a part in it where you write about sort of the feelings that come with when can you have an Israeli flag out on your person in public in Toronto, for example, and when that feels safe. And I was just thinking about the fact that I would not feel safe doing something like that. Would you have felt unsafe before October 7th?
No, not at all.
Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll talk about before October 7th. Last summer in Toronto, there was a celebration or a commemoration of a significant milestone anniversary of the Christie Pitts riots, which was in 1933. Swastika clubs in Toronto started beating up Jews, and it was at a baseball game. So last summer, the Minister of Education, all the cabinet ministers, they all came to Christie Pitts. They brought school children, thousands and thousands of school children came to see this play, to teach people about anti-Semitism and tolerance today. So there was lots of attention paid to this. And what I found was, and this is May, when I went to one of these events with my mom, I was talking to the school children who came, because as one does, you want to say, so what do you know about anti-Semitism? Do you ever meet Jewish people in your schools? And as a matter of fact, there's very few Jewish kids in this school in Peel region, which is to the west of Toronto. And on Multiculturalism Day, the day that a Holocaust survivor, Eli Gotz, spoke at that school and talked about his experiences as a survivor. Guess what flag got ripped down in the school and torn? On Multiculturalism Day, obviously it's the Israeli flag. There's like 4 Jewish kids in that school. But now with what happened after October 7th, it is everywhere. Kids are in Toronto. I'm working on a story that kids are getting beaten up in schools in a Jewish neighborhood, 30% Jewish school. The principal's doing nothing. The superintendent is doing nothing because there are mitigating circumstances.
So what's interesting about this, you're saying you had just said that no one was getting physically hurt. This sounds like people are getting physically
murdered. I'm talking about murder.
Okay.
So there is massive bullying going on. There's massive slights and comments, and there was Heil Hitler salutes in schools before. Kids were doing that, but it seems that now they have justification as opposed for ignorance. That's the difference. They're like, you see, we're allowed because you're bad, you like Israel, you're Jews. I don't feel safe. And in fact, at all these protests, when for example, in front of the Bayit, which was a big Toronto protest in early March, where they were hosting an Israeli real estate seminar, which personally I feel was a good thing, that if you want to protest and you're against Israel's policies in the settlements and Gaza, it's a legit place to protest outside a synagogue that's hosting sales in Israel. I find that is fine. Yes, it's in a Jewish neighborhood, but you want to do it, I think it's okay. I'm going to get in trouble for this, but
I agree with you. I think
I agree with you as well.
So,
and I wanted to go as a journalist to the other side and talk to the leaders. The police wouldn't let me go by myself. They said, it's not safe for you. I've been a journalist in wars in Africa. I never had this issue of it's not safe for you, not because of you're going to get screamed at, hit, or punched, but it's because I couldn't go there because there was like mines and bombs, and it wasn't safe for me to go to a minefield, for example, that was physically dangerous. But here they wouldn't even let me cross the street in Canada to go interview a leader who's on a megaphone screaming about how Jews are genocide because of my physical safety, because I had the Canadian Jewish News logo on my ID card. Like if I had CBC, it would be fine. Do you know what I mean? I found that very physically upsetting. And that was something that I haven't experienced before as a Jew.
Well, something that I've just been wondering about is what is going to be the impact of all of this on, like, on the one hand, you have younger Jews and younger people in general being less pro-Israel, but at the same time, certainly in history, such atmospheres encouraged stronger Jewish sentiment and specifically stronger Zionist sentiment. And I'm just wondering what we'll see now.
I know that people who are already pro-Israel are way more pro-Israel than they were before, and doing more things. I just did a story today about the runners and the knitters and the candle lighters, and they're walking and they're raising funds, and way more solidarity than they were before. Even if they're not shul people, they are community people going on missions. Even though it costs a lot of money, they leave their business for 6 days to go pick sweet potatoes to help Israel. So that's definitely true. But I also see younger people, and I'm talking about my own family, who they are now questioning Israel's right to exist. They going to Palestinian rallies. My mom's friend's granddaughter is now marching in pro-Palestinian rallies, a Jewish girl, because they feel so outraged about Gaza.
So I have 2 questions.
And that is something I don't know if I'd seen in my lifetime before.
One is, do we think like things would have been different if we hadn't for the past 5, 10, 15 years really been harping on this idea that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. The IRA definition is the definition of anti-Semitism. We have to connect anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism. If there had been a decoupling of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, do we think that something might be different in the sense that you can then point and say, don't protest at a synagogue. That's nothing to do with Judaism, it has to do with Zionism, right? That we really want to say that there is something different about this. When you take down an Israeli flag, I want you to know that that's bad, but that's political stuff. But, if you go and then say, Hitler was right, gas the Jews, that's very, very different. And then we'd be able to have a clearer definition of what's going on here, that support for Gaza, right, might not necessarily automatically mean support for anti-Semitism.
So I think that would have been a mistaken position, that if you're anti-Israel, then you're anti-Semitic. I think that's not true. I think if you're anti this particular government, it doesn't make you anti-Semitic. Where, like, a lot of Jews are anti-Trudeau. Are they anti-Canadian? No, they're not boycotting Canada. They don't want this government in, for example. Or if you're talking about...
I think if you believe that there's this existing country that should be dismantled, and only that one, and you're not anti-nationalism in some sort of broader sense, then yes. And I guess I don't think that you can totally decouple these things. I think you can say that criticizing Israel isn't anti-Semitic. You can do this sort of trite thing of reciting the line that people recite all the time that isn't wrong, but it doesn't really get you very far. Or you can say, yes, there is one Jewish country in the world, and if you're more angry at that than you are at anything else that's ever happening, yes, I do think that's anti-Semitic.
Because the double standard is anti-Semitic. Nobody's telling Canada they don't have the right to exist because of the way they treat the First Nations communities, right? If you want to legitimize criticizing the state of Israel now, in terms of the government, it's different than the state. The state exists for 76 almost
and
years.
This is nuance that is lost on a lot of people. This is nuance that is lost, to be fair, and I'm going to go even one step further. This is nuance that seems to be lost on the establishment Jewish community. And that as soon as you criticize Israel, or as soon as you criticize what Israel is doing now, since October 7th, right, then automatically you are branded as, a far left, anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic person. Look at all that happened. Absolutely.
Okay, because Avi, I have not been.
I'll give you. I write a column where I do this. Well, you're not Yara Sachs, who's a cabinet member, and you're not Chuck Schumer, who is the Senate Majority Leader.
Even Charles Bronfman told us
when you go,
that it's time for Israel to stop, and he is such a supporter of the state of Israel.
And these are centrist positions, but as soon as you make a position that is remotely critical, you're getting called for you're no longer going to be elected. You're an evil person. We're going to protest outside. You're an Israeli. This is an Israeli woman, and she cannot go and make any critique of Israel because the establishment has essentially said, if you critique Israel, anything that Israel does is totally defensible and is totally right. And we cannot say anything like this. And that's a problem.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's a problem with our youth, because there are youth that see these distinctions, and now they feel alienated. They say, well, if you're telling me that I'm an anti-Zionist because I have a position of it's complicated, then, I guess I'm an anti-Zionist, right? We have made the purity test for Zionism so strong that we have killed any potential for nuance. And there's a lot of nuance here, and we might be wrong in what we're doing in Israel right now. It's not me, again, I'm not the one holding a gun, and I'm not the one directing what's going on. But if we consider ourselves as a community, this is a problem.
I mean, the thing is, you have to remember, a lot of people say that the reason that Netanyahu is going this far has less to do with the just war and getting the hostages back, but staying out of jail.
Be careful, Ellen. You're going to get canceled.
But I don't know. I guess, Avi, I'm going to have to just question a little bit of this, because I think, yes, people are saying any number of things. And it does seem like we are pretty much establishment Canadian Jewish something or other, right? I think
we're very anti-establishment.
But we are also, no, it depends how you look at it. But I mean, I guess I would just push back on the idea that if you say that there is a limit to how much destruction is okay, that you are suddenly branded an anti-Semite. I get much more people annoyed at me for being the rabid Zionist that I am than I do from the other direction, from anybody saying, oh, Phoebe, you're not really a Zionist because you think there's a limit to...
I hear that. And I think that on both sides that this is a problem. The other question that I wanted to get to that you were mentioning, Ellen, was the nature of what's going on day to day. And you're like, the police won't let me go there for fearing for my own safety. And this brings up something that we had discussed previously also. And I really want to, bring this up here. At the governmental level, it doesn't feel like the shift has been that strong in terms of Israel vis-a-vis pro or not. But the thing that is the most important thing to note, and yet I find that nobody's really talking about it, is that the government still protects Jews. Right, both at the highest level saying that anti-Semitism is wrong, and at the local level, the police saying that I'm going to protect and I'm going to investigate any anti-Semitic incidents. And so we are not at the same level as other eras where the government
it's not
itself,
institutional hate like the Nazis are rounding us up.
Even in 2024, one has to look at, for example, trans rights in America, right? There are governments that are going and institutionalizing anti-trans or anti-abortion, right? As opposed to here.
Or Black history in Florida, exactly.
Whatever it might be, the institutions are doing this from the top down. Here it's from the bottom, and it's staying at the bottom. And that
I would have to disagree with you on some of it. Of course, I agree with you that people say it's not 1938 all over again. But it feels that way in the fact that, yes, the government is still putting police around Jewish schools and spending millions of dollars to protect Jewish institutions. We're working on a story about the called SIP grants, security infrastructure grants, millions of dollars. The thing is, the Jewish community does not go into particularly Muslim or mosque or Palestinian areas and scream and yell and harass. They don't blockade classrooms. And that is what is making it feel oppressive, is that we're behaving, the Jewish community is behaving like citizens, and we can't even go to class. We can't go to a cafe. Our businesses are getting doxxed on. That's what's the difference, is that it's everywhere, that the government is supposed to be implementing IRA. It's supposed to be implementing anti-racism training, and yet they're not.
So I just want to talk a little bit about the why here, why this is happening, because I think that what you see is it's not just that anti-Semitism is understood in a kind of intersectional framework as not the most pressing of all oppressions. And I think you would get that. That was what had been the case pre-October 7th, that this was just not the biggest priority, and fair enough, right? However, I don't think that's quite enough to explain what's happening now. I think what you see is much more this idea that if you oppose anti-Semitism, what you're really doing, that is code, that is understood as code for support for Israeli military actions. And that and also in some sort of twisted way, I do not think this is how it works, this idea that anti-Semitism isn't really anti-Semitism, it is, or it is, but whatever, it doesn't matter, that it is somehow the righteous anger of people who see all these deaths, and how could they react otherwise? And I don't think this adds up, but I think that the Jewish community needs to do maybe a better case in explaining why this doesn't add up, rather than just saying it's anti-Semitism. It is anti-Semitism, but I don't feel like we have gotten the message across about why that's a problem, why that does not actually help anybody, why it's unacceptable, even if it were helping somebody, but it is still, yeah. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is I feel like there's some higher level messaging issue. Does that make sense?
I think you're 100% right.
And here's the thing. 90% of the Jewish Canadians are Zionists and love Israel. We've done surveys. So to be able to say, if you are Jewish Canadian, you have nothing to do with what's going on in Israel, is a bit facetious, I have to say, because A, we donate money. B, we physically go. Our people we know go to the IDF. Which
means that people do have a bigger right to protest.
So they do have some way to say, they say, oh, Heather Reisman's targeted because she's a Jew. Well, no. She also helps lone soldiers, her group called Chesed, plus she owns property and hotels in Israel. So it's a little bit more complicated and nuanced to say we have nothing to do with it. But the Palestinian narrative seems to have done, for over the last 20, 30 years, a heck of a better job than the Jewish Canadian community about, hey, this is wrong. And they've done it quietly and not so quietly. What I think is happening is that because there are, and I'm going to get criticized for this, but it's something Avi and I have talked about before, there are maybe 10, 12, 13, I don't know how many Jewish organizations all sending out press releases, whether it's Friends of Simon Wiesenthal or B'nai B'rith or New Israel Fund, you name it, CJA. There's so many that are doing this as an out, Hillel, Stand By Us. I can't even count them all. There's so many grassroots ones that are all screaming. If they did first of all, who knows who to talk to? Which one is the right one to represent our Jewish community? Well, people say there's too many diverse views, so we can't have a unified voice. But what I'm trying to say is, I think the Jewish community, you're right, needs to do a bloody better job in telling their story.
But the other thing I just wanted to ask was about numbers, because something that I certainly noticed moving from New York to Toronto was just a difference in demography. And that I think that Palestinians are just going to have more sort of natural support. No, in Toronto, and in Canada, perhaps more broadly. And it isn't so much about like just narrative, but there are people who feel as part of the Arab and Muslim world an affinity for this group of people, that there just isn't going to be the same equivalent for Jews and there aren't, it's not that there are so many Jews anywhere globally, but certainly like if you're on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, you do not feel like this is a sort of obscure
right. Well, there's 8 million Jews in the United States, and there's
right. So I mean, I just wonder how much messaging, how much better messaging. I mean, I feel like the messaging almost just, what I would like to see is just messaging about the fact that yes, you can't really unlink Jews and Israel. You can, however, unlink the idea that hurting Jews in Canada helps Palestinians, because I do not see the mechanism by which that even is supposed to happen, but that I feel like there's a lot of sort of nodding along to this and like, well, you know, it's for the good cause. No, it is not for any, it's not doing anything. It's just, if anything,
I disagree with you.
You think it helps Palestinians?
Not doing anything. I do. I think it helps the story, because if it interferes with, quote, ordinary Canadians, quote, going about their daily business, they can't get downtown, they can't go to a show, they can't cross a bridge, they can't go about their daily life because there are people protesting for rights of the Palestinians. It makes ordinary Canadians who couldn't tell a Palestinian if they walked into one, or couldn't tell what a Jew looked like if they walked into one, it makes them annoyed. And then when they're annoyed, they pay attention and they're like, well, what's going on? So it's making us discuss it and rethink our positions. So more so the Canadians who are hearing, especially the politicians, are hearing from ordinary citizens in their writings and saying, hey, what are we doing about this? Because it's now a national, it's on the table. You said the Globe and Mail talked about the Jewish anti-Semitism problem, but on their front pages day to day is how bad Israel is. UNRWA is, you know, the best thing since sliced bread. You know, they won't even call the Hamas terrorists. So the media is already completely on side, except for the National Post, of the Palestinian narrative in Canada. So that's why the country is moving towards pro-Palestinians.
I think I might be asking, I think I'm not really asking precisely enough, because what I'm saying is, I'm not saying does protesting for Palestine help Palestinians? I'm saying, does making Jews feel miserable perhaps not do something else, which is make Jews more pro-Israel?
Well, the way in which you protest these things is usually directed at something, instead of just generically standing somewhere and saying, I protest X, right? When there was the students' struggle for Soviet Jewry, where did they protest? In front of the Soviet embassy. It wouldn't make sense to go and protest in front of the French embassy, because French have nothing to do with it, right? So they did this. They did a lot of civil disobedience in a more probably pacifist and peaceful manner, but it was civil disobedience. It was about getting arrested and causing a ruckus until this, you know, position, until this idea got pushed forward. And I can count many other examples of what happens when civil disobedience, you know, is there. They weren't sitting at lunch counters, right, in New York City. They were sitting at lunch counters in the South, because that's where the issue was happening. And unfortunately, right, in Canada, the representative, as Ellin, you pointed out, because we send money to them and because we invest and because we want to have this deep connection, is the Jewish community. So if you believe that the Gazans are suffering miserably because of what's going on in Israel, then the place that you go and do it is against Jewish communal organizations, because they keep saying, we stand with Israel. Well, then they're telling us, please don't stand with Israel. And I may disagree with you, but that's obviously the place to go.
I think that the idea is that there needs to be a distinction between, like, people
who
own a restaurant,
anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism?
What I'm saying is that I think that you can know that a restaurant owner, we had this conversation, I think months ago, Avi, about, like, you were asking me, like, would I go to a restaurant run by a Palestinian restaurateur? And I was like, obviously. That is where I'm different. That's where I would not be upset with somebody who's Palestinian being pro-Palestinian. Somebody who has squat to do with any of it being really pro-Palestinian, that's where I would be more. I have not gone back to the coffee shop that went all in for Palestine. That's a bunch of white Canadians.
We love it. We love it when non-Jews, right, are Zionist, and we support them, and we raise them up in the community, and we point to them and say,
even if they're problematic.
Exactly.
We talked about that.
Right. So many of those people. And yet, if somebody who's not Jewish says free Palestine, we don't say you have the right to your opinion, and that's great. I may disagree with you, but you see things differently. We say you don't have the right to have that opinion because you're not Palestinian?
Wait a second. I didn't say that anybody doesn't have a right to know. I'm saying that I have a right to have the feelings I have about it. I'm not boycott. Yeah. I'm not with a placard in front of the coffee shop. I'm just not keen on getting a coffee there.
Fair enough.
No, what I'm saying is I think I do not hold it against somebody Palestinian being pro-Palestinian. I don't think that they, out of anti-Semitic malice of all the causes in the world, chose the Palestinian cause if they are Palestinian. No, I mean, that's not how it works. Yeah.
You know, what's interesting to me, we talked a bit about what it's like on the ground. Would I feel safe walking around with my Israeli flag? And the answer is, of course not. But I'm very interested in what's happening in terms of the federal politics, because April 7th, I think it is, Pierre Poilievre is making his sweep through Jewish community, large Jewish community synagogues in Montreal and in Toronto. I'm going to see if he says the same thing, because I have the first speech, so hopefully he'll change his words. But, you know, Anthony Housefather is now thinking about jumping to the Conservatives. We'll see. And obviously the Conservatives are making a concerted effort to get the Jewish vote in large cities. Poilievre is on the hustings already and has been for a while. Now, the Jewish vote, quote unquote, is small compared to the vote with people who are in the Muslim faith. There's just, the numbers don't add up. So why would he want to do that? Is he capitalizing on this one issue vote? Because that's what happened with Harper. He became a one issue vote, right? Jews voted for Harper because of his, you know, less government, but also pro-Israel stance. And then when the Liberals came in, it's, you know, Trudeau said, there's not going to be any inch of daylight between us and Israel and our position from now for what Harper did before. But that's not true anymore. They made their political calculations. The Liberals have been seeing where the writing on the wall is, and their members and their caucus, their support is coming from the pro-Muslim, pro-Palestinian side, not from the Jewish side. So I think that it's very interesting that I think we're going to see, we are already seeing people who were never involved in politics before. And I'm talking about people that I know, Holocaust survivors' kids, especially, who are traumatized by what's happening now in Canada. And that's a whole other podcast to do, is how Holocaust survivors and their children are feeling about now, post October 7th. It's a trauma that we haven't talked about. They're getting active in the Conservative Party, grassroots. So I'm very interested in why this is happening.
This is interesting because I don't get the sense in the U.S. that there's going to be a big Jewish shift to the Republican Party, because
the Jews,
except in Florida, where that's where they are, all Republicans.
They already are. The idea is that there hasn't been whatever shift has happened has already happened.
Yeah, I'm not sure that.
They love Trump.
So if we are going to talk about the U.S.,
right?
Could I just ask a question about just sort of the view from abroad? How, like, is there an impression? Like, I found it interesting to see a Canadian newspaper saying, oh no, we have an anti-Semitism problem, when you also see a lot of commentary from abroad saying, look how anti-Semitic Canada is. Why is Canada so anti-Semitic? And I wanted to just maybe like pause for a moment on those sort of the view from abroad.
I think it's a great point. I can just give you two anecdotal examples. Yesterday, I got a phone call from the Times of Israel. They're writing an article about why Canada's Jews are moving to Israel because of anti-Semitism. They basically quoted all the interviews I did with Canadians who'd made Aliyah this past year since October 7th. And they said, can we talk to this person? What's going on in Canada? Channel 13 from Israel called me last week and said, we need somebody who speaks Hebrew to talk to us about the motion in Parliament. What's happening with Canada? You people in Canada, like the Israelis, don't understand why Canada is so anti-Semitic. However, it's not just those two anecdotes. When you see video going on social media of the police giving coffee to Palestinian protesters on a bridge, Tim Hortons coffee, like the iconic photos of that, right? That goes viral, and all these WhatsApp and Telegram and Signal, and as well as regular social media. And it gets Israelis upset. They're like, what is happening? We're here in Israel fighting a war, a real existential war, but it's worse in Canada. At least in Israel, we know who our enemies are. And you people in Canada, like, we feel bad for you. This is the story that we're hearing from Israel.
That's interesting. I guess I see much more, like, I end up seeing this more from the U.S. perspective. A lot of this kind of, there for years, there's been a kind of smug, we have it much better in the U.S. than in Canada. Like, Jews have it better in the U.S. than in Canada. And I feel like, I almost wonder if a little bit of that is receding now, in terms of just that there's so much press about things being terrible in the US, things like the Big Atlantic article by Franklin Foer about the sort of the end of the golden age of American Jews, and things like my social media, for very particular reasons, being filled with stuff about anti-Semitic graffiti on the Upper West Side, things like that. So I wonder if that's maybe changing.
So what I hear, and I'd like to hear what you guys think too, what I hear is that we also grew up in a golden age here in Canada from post Second World War until, I don't know, maybe 2014, where it was great to be Jewish. We had Jewish Supreme Court justices, and we had Jewish people in arts and hockey players. And I mean, for Canada, that's a big deal, right? And Zach Hyman just scored his 50th and 51st goal, a Toronto Jewish boy. And already you heard people say, yeah, but he only got to 50 goals because his parents are insanely rich. You would never have heard that before. You know, it's not the same anymore as it was growing up. We didn't have to explain ourselves. We didn't have to arm our children, arm our grandchildren, how to go to school safely, how to call us for panic buttons when your classmates are screaming at you, and you have to walk a gauntlet through York University to get to your car.
Do you think part of this is that we're just in a different world, though, across the board? You know, that we are more nakedly partisan across many issues and across all party lines. This is just the new world that we're in. I mean, I actually think
it's the world of the truckers.
I think that it was
say anything and no one does anything.
You mentioned Pierre Poilievre visiting all of these Jewish organizations and Jewish communal spaces, giving this speeches and having this like rallying the Jews together to come become conservative. I don't like. Is it just me, or that would not have happened 20 years ago? The idea that Jewish communal spaces became nakedly partisan. The idea
No, it happened. And when Harper came, Harper was launched
20 years ago. I'm talking about when, when
in 2015,
Chrétien was launching, was it about, and that was about launching a campaign. I'm talking about there's not even a campaign here. There is not Jewish communal organizations, some saying that we're liberal and we're going to have a liberal, a campaign launch, and other people are going to have a conservative one, where it's like there is total support for the Conservative Party within these Jewish communal organizations. There is no mention at all that there is a party system. The liberals are evil, according to these Jewish communal organizations. I don't think that used to happen anymore. What used to happen is you'd have synagogues having debates. I don't think synagogues would host debates anymore because they just want to support whatever they want to support.
I think it also comes from the government side too. They're choosing where they're where they're putting their effort, but because of social media, they don't have to go through the synagogue to reach Jews anymore. They can just tweet it and people will see it, right? They don't have gatekeepers anymore. But what I do want to say is that looking at this Canadian Jewish News' coverage over the last decade or two of the leaders, we interviewed, not myself, but we interviewed all four leaders. So Elizabeth May, Tom Mulcair for the NDP, Elizabeth May for the Greens, Harper and Trudeau in the election when 2018. And Trudeau has not spoken to us at all. I've asked for an interview for him, with him and with Melanie Joly since October 7th. I've asked. I've heard nothing. Meanwhile, I get tons of stuff in my inbox from Poilievre's guy. Just started, personally phoned me a few months ago and said, and phoned our news editor, Lila, please come to this event at Sharei Shemayim in Toronto. That isn't happening with the Liberals. But so are they strategically choosing to alienate Jewish voices, Jewish media? I don't know. But it's a very telling issue.
Or do they take support for granted? I mean, that's something that can happen. Like I'm just saying, the U.S. Democrats and
I think they've written it off. I really do. I think they've written off the Jewish vote, because if they hadn't, then they would never be releasing things on Friday afternoon that are derogatory or not derogatory, but upsetting to the Jewish community. Friday afternoons at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock. That's what the Liberals do every single month whenever UNRWA or some kind of they announce the new.
Well, that's just a news dump that they want to bury anyways. It has nothing to do with the Jews specifically.
They don't do that. They don't do that for other important things. It's only they know that the Jews are going to have Shabbat and they won't be able to. Observant Jews won't be able to.
I think we'll agree to disagree on that one. But anyways, this has been wonderful, Ellin. Will you stick around with some nachas or broigas this week? Let's get to that right after our sponsor.
Are you in the market for a new watch or a special piece of jewelry? Are you looking for the perfect engagement ring to pop the question? Atelier Lou has all this and more. Eric and the team at Atelier Lou can craft a piece for you, or you can select from some of the exclusive designers that they offer. From a simple bangle to a statement necklace, Atelier Lou can make you or your loved ones sparkle. Located in the heart of Westmount in Montreal or online at atelierlou.com, visit Atelier Lou for your next watch or jewelry purchase. And when you do, make sure to use promo code BON18 for 10% off your next purchase. That's atelierlou.com.
Ellin, what's your nachas this week?
So my nachas this week is that I've been working at a charity called Vahafta in Toronto, which helps the homeless, and it sends home-cooked food and clothing and supplies to hundreds of homeless people that are living rough in Toronto. I do that as a volunteer. And this week, I just wrapped up a 2-month project where they got a ton of hockey jerseys donated from a very lovely gesture by a Toronto Jewish manufacturer called Athletic Knit. And for the last 3 and 4 months, I've been sorting them. And we've been sending them to First Nation communities and poor communities, sports programs all around the country, in Ontario, through the Toronto Police, as well as Israeli teams, Israeli rec teams, and soldiers, wounded soldiers in Israel. And so that's my nachas for the week. It's been a wonderful project to do.
Phoebe, what's your nachas this week?
So I'm going to have to, this is going to be a little different in tone. Well, it's a nachas borgas. Can I do a nachas borgas?
Please.
Okay. It's an article, The Case for Marrying an Older Man, by an author named Grazie. I don't know how she pronounces it. Sophia Christie. It's in The Cut. It is an interesting essay. Its significance to be unpacked perhaps in a future column of mine on the CJN's website. But basically, it's not a feminist personal essay at all. It's, if anything, a kind of anti-feminist personal essay. It fits a lot with like these themes we've been talking about a bit on here to do with like trad wives and all of this. And I'm interested in what it says about our times that this essay appeared at all. I am not endorsing the essay. I am, however, endorsing reading it because it's interesting. And it's interesting that it even appeared. So that is my nachbroig of the week.
Okay.
Avi, what have you got?
I have to go full nachas mode. We had our bat mitzvah. Nadiva did amazingly well. She did such a wonderful job. She read from the book of Esther. She danced up on with the DJ. She had her thing. She spoke well. She gave a beautiful shout outs to everybody. There was family there. There was great food. There was a great time. Everybody showed up in pajamas. Well, most everybody. And you sort of had to be there, but Nadiva, we're super, super proud of her. And I'm in full on nachas still, like bubble. So we'll finally come down from that soon enough, but the plans are already afoot for the for Hadar's bat mitzvah for our next child, because it's in just a little over a year, and stay tuned for that one. But that is by far the best nachas that I've had all week.
Well, congratulations. That's really, really great.
Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending March 30th, Shabbat Parshat Tzav. The show is produced by Michael Freeman and edited by Zach Kaufman. The executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Freeman. Our music is by So-Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We would love it if you told a friend about Bonjour Chai. It is one of the best ways we get our new listeners. And as always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca.